We're standing at the entrance to the old Ross homestead. This is where my great grandfather, Manning Luther Ross, came to make his claim and build his home. His home was right over the hill behind me, and that's where my father was born in the house that was there, long since gone. Manning Luther Ross left this place, left his wife and four boys to go fight in the Civil War back in South Carolina and never returned. Now going into New Prospect Cemetery. This is an old cemetery, as you can see from the sign, started in 1855, and that's when there were migrations from South Carolina, Spartanburg County, South Carolina, to this area by families, including the Ross family, and they came and settled in this area, and they named it New Prospect after the same church and cemetery that they had in South Carolina, named New Prospect. Okay, we're in New Prospect Cemetery, and this is the grave of my great-grandmother, Mary A. Polly Wingo Ross. She was a Wingo in Spartanburg County, South Carolina, where she married my great-grandfather, and they migrated here to Rusk County, Texas in 1853. They had at least one son, maybe another child, when they came here, and then they had several more after they arrived. And her husband, my great-grandfather, went off to the Civil War and never returned. And so she reared the family on the farm down near Churchill. The stone that's beside her grave is one that I had put there for my great-grandfather. It's a memorial only. He, of course, is not buried there. But I got his war record. He was in the Civil War, and I got his war record, and that qualified him to get a marker. And so I put the marker there only as a memorial beside her stone. This is the grave of another one of my great-grandfathers, J.R.K. Brooks. Grandpa Brooks was married 4 times, and he was also an officer in the Confederate Army, and his daughter is my grandmother, and this is where his 4th wife buried him, here in New Prospect Cemetery. We're now at the graves of my grandparents. On this side of the tombstone is the marker for my grandfather, James Manning Ross, and on the other side, his wife, Nettie Emily Brooks Ross. And he died in November of 1907 of typhoid fever. And then she died just a few months later in 1908, also of typhoid fever. That left my father and his siblings as orphans, and they kind of had to raise themselves after that. And then he also had a sister. My dad had a sister, Leela, who also died of typhoid fever and is buried right here. So it was a very tragic event for the family, but they managed okay. Uncle Oscar, my dad's oldest brother, only brother, made the living for the family and took care of them, and they all managed to survive to adulthood. We're now in the old tabernacle at Waldrop Cemetery. This is the first place I ever heard the Sacred Heart song. It's in this facility. all wood floor, all wooden benches. Of course, this pulpit wasn't here because it wasn't a church, and this platform wasn't here. But the same benches were arranged in a hollow square, and with a lot of gentry singing here. The community was full of gentry, and they fill up this building with Sacred Heart singers on the annual cemetery homecoming day, which was sometime in the hot summer. But anyway, Sacred Heart singing sounds really good in this building. Here we are at my grandparents' grave. My grandfather was James M. McRae. He was called Jim, and he died at age 74, I think it was. He had cancer. And my grandmother was an Allen, and she was first married to a Finley, and her first husband died in Indian Territory, and then she married what we call Papa McRae. We're still in Waldrop Cemetery. We're now at the grave of my grandmother's father, Solomon Young Allen. The stone says S.Y. That means Solomon Young. I think his mother was a Young. Anyway, he was born in 1840s in Georgia, and he was a Civil War veteran. And after the Civil War, he moved to East Texas and married and had a family, including my grandmother. I'm standing at a Browning grave of Ari Buckner Browning. She was a relative. My grandmother, McRae, called her cousin Ari. And she was the grandmother, great-grandmother of Owen's friend, Michael Browning. We're now at Strong Cemetery. This cemetery was started way back in the mid-1850s. And it was started by the Strong family as a family cemetery. And then over the years, neighbors started burying their family here. And it's grown and grown to now a big public cemetery. And it was started by land that was donated by the John Strong family, a pioneer leader in the Churchill community.
And why are the Rosses here and not at Waldrop or New Prospect? Why is your parents here?
My father's parents are buried at New Prospect Cemetery, and my mother's parents are buried at Waldrop Cemetery. My father did not want to be buried at Waldrop, and my mother did not want to be buried at New Prospect. So they compromised and settled on a Strong Cemetery, which was really nearest their home and where all of their friends were buried anyway. We're now in Strong Cemetery, and I'm standing at the grave of Dr. Jesse E. Ross, Jr. He's the son of Dr. Jesse E. Ross, Sr.
He was a doctor too?
Yes, they were both doctors. And the senior doctor was the brother to my grandfather's brother. So this is the grave of Dr. Jesse Ellick Ross, Sr. He was a longtime country doctor in this community, and he married a Strong. His wife was a Strong, and that's why they were buried here. He was a legendary doctor in the Churchill community for many years. Dr. Jesse Ellick Ross, Sr. was my grandfather's brother, and he's the one who sold the Bell Ross house, what's now the Bell Ross house. He sold that to my grandfather and built another house at Churchill near the store. And he later left that house and built a home in Henderson. But that house that he built in Churchill was bought and moved to Henderson and restored, and there's a family that lives in it today. And we saw my grandfather, or step-grandfather's grave at Waldrop Cemetery, who was James W. McRae. And this is his son, Goldie, my Uncle Goldie McRae, and his wife, Aunt Katie. And Uncle Goldie had a brother, Fred, who was also buried in this cemetery, and a brother, Troy. And they were close to us. They had no children. So my dad, when he picked out this lot, he picked it out with 18 spaces, enough spaces for him and his wife, my mother, and for each of their 8 children and their spouses. And that would total 18. Of course, not all of the children are buried here, and will not be buried here, but some of them are. Next to their grave is my brother Jimmy and his wife June, his first wife June, and who was a United Methodist minister, and they're buried here. And next to them is another brother, Monty Jr., and his wife Sylvia, who was a Grant. And next to them is my sister Jan. Jan was next to me in age. I was the youngest of the 8 siblings, and Jan was next to me, so she and I were very close. And we move on to the next grave is my brother Jimmy's oldest son, Stacy, who is buried here. Stacy died suddenly just a couple of years ago. And we proceed there to the very last stone in the lot, which belongs to my oldest brother Finley's son David and his wife. They're not deceased. They're not buried here yet, but they went ahead and put their tombstone down. And I urged him to go ahead and put it in this location because it's at the very end of the reserved lot, and so that we wouldn't lose the entire lot. So David says that now he is the border protector. And he's keeping the Priors and the Chapmans out, who are right next to us. Here we are at my parents' graves, Monty M. Ross Sr. and his wife, Maud Finley Ross.